Welcome to the Salto de Fe podcast, where everyday people like you and me share their stories of courage, vulnerability, and the transformative power of taking leaps of faith. I'm your host, Gabrielle, and I'll be your travel guide on today's adventure.
Welcome back to another episode of the Salto de Fe podcast. This is episode 2. So I appreciate it if you have tuned back in. If you are new here, you don't have to go back too far to catch up. Just one more episode before this. And I am really appreciative of all the kind words and support that I received after putting out that first episode. This is definitely a learning as I go type of thing. And that's sort of the theme of this episode, which is aptly titled, This Ain't My First Rodeo. In case you have not heard that phrase before, it basically means this isn't the first time that I've done this. Like, I can handle it. I know what I'm doing, which is usually how I feel, even when I take these leaps of faith, even when I'm in the midst of a salto de fe. I've done this before. This is not the first time. So I want to tell you a little bit about the previous saltos de fe in my life and kind of how they turned out and why I did them. And of course, leave you with some advice that I hope will be practical and helpful for you. But I would say that I have gone through 3 prior leaps of faith that have absolutely steered my life in a specific direction to where I am now. And now I am in the midst of another one, and I have another one ahead. So when I say this isn't my first rodeo, I really mean it. But in the first episode, I explained that a salto de fe is a leap of faith that causes or leads to a transformation. There's something significant about that decision, and it really can change the trajectory of your life. And the first for me would have been in undergrad when I changed my major from music therapy to exercise science. I had grown up singing. I loved music. I still love music. I still love singing. But that was really a part of my identity. And that was a course that I took every year. I was always in choir. I went to, the National Honors Choir. I was extremely involved. I loved show choir. I loved theater. And it seemed like an obvious decision for me to do something with music as I pursued higher education. And I have also always had a passion for helping people. And I chose music therapy as a major because that was a way in which I could help others. I could live in a compassionate way and treat others with compassion and kindness and help them in a very real way with music, which was something that was so special to me. And I applied to one university and I got in. It was one of 2 that had music therapy as a major. And I actually ended up earning a full ride scholarship, in part because of academics, but also because of the interview. And I had created, as part of that process, a video about the importance of music to people and the impact that it had in their lives. And so I felt very attached to the outcome of becoming a music therapist because it seemed like that was the reason that I was there. But midway through my first semester, I found myself really falling out of love with music, with singing. I was struggling to keep up with all the practice because I wasn't able to just sing. The voice was my main instrument, but I needed to learn guitar, I needed to learn piano, I needed to learn percussion instruments, I needed to learn art and music history. And I had this identity crisis because, I thought that this was what I was here for. I thought that I loved this. And I was so distraught at the sensation of dreading practicing, of especially singing. And I also thought, well, I'm here because I earned my place here because of music. Like I told them music is so important to me and that's what I'm going to major in. And now here I am like waffling, changing my mind. Am I supposed to just dig in and say, no, this is what I committed to. I've got to follow through on this. And like grit my teeth for the next 4 years? Or do I give myself the opportunity, the freedom to change my mind? Because alongside that identity crisis was not just me falling out of love with music. It was me having an absolutely fantastic time in my biology courses. I was really loving those courses, those concepts. And I had also gotten into rock climbing just at the indoor climbing gym. And because I was so into rock climbing, I wanted to start exercising so I could become better at climbing. And then I really fell in love with the gym. And I thought, gosh, is there a thing that like combines science and exercise? Can I do that for a living? And lo and behold, there is. So I switched my major from music therapy to exercise science. And I'll talk a little bit more too about why that was such a surprise to me and everyone, um, and why that felt like so unexpected and so scary. But it was really a pivotal moment because I pursued that major, and that's when I found that I had a passion for teaching. Because in my undergrad anatomy and physiology course, I don't know exactly why. Maybe I mean because I hadn't been diagnosed with ADHD yet, so I didn't understand how my brain worked. But I was like that meme where the guys like got all of the papers stuck to the wall with the string attaching all of them. I was like, I can see everything, how it's all connected. And I ended up tutoring my classmates for the entire semester and for free just because I loved it. And I actually was invited by my professor to teach the last lecture, which was on renal physiology, which was just the absolute coolest thing that I had ever done. So that obviously steered my life in a specific direction. I went on to pursue my doctorate. And after I finished that, I became a professor of exercise science. And while I was teaching, I started a little blog about sport nutrition because I loved that. That was my favorite thing to teach. I was really educated and dedicated to the gym and all things sport nutrition. And I was sort of in the right place at the right time to be discovered by someone who was the co-owner of a really prominent nutrition and training coaching company. And he ended up offering me a coaching position. It was remote. And so I could do this alongside teaching. So I had a very small client load, but I really loved it. Meanwhile, I was having another one of those identity crises where I was like, gosh, I thought I was going to really like this. But teaching in higher ed as an assistant professor was not what I expected. And I found that I was not having the types of experiences that I had when I was tutoring. And I was really missing out on the connections that I was forming, at that time back in the day with my classmates, but also with students when I was in grad school and I was, teaching smaller courses at a different institution. And I thought, gosh, did I just like waste all that time, going all through grad school and everything? Like now I don't actually enjoy being a professor very much. Like I thought I was going to love this. This seemed so obvious, and now it's not. And now do I grin and bear? Do I grit my teeth and push through, or do I once again give myself the opportunity to change course? Because at this point, I was in my fourth year of teaching, and the next year I was going to have to go up for a promotion, which is like a version of tenure, and really commit myself to higher ed. I was not going to be able to do both of those well enough to do either one any service. So I was not going to be able to maintain, a client load and go up for promotion. And ultimately, I did decide to resign. And I went into coaching full time, and then I started my own business. And once again, it was a huge change of course because I went from the certainty, the commitment of higher ed with a retirement plan and pension and everything to being an entrepreneur. And I had never run a business before, and suddenly I had 4 times as many clients, um, and yet it was incredibly fulfilling. And that to this day feels like one of the most correct choices that I've made, or the choice that I was able to grow and gain the most from. That seemed to steer my life like kind of more directly into the path that is right for me. I started like music therapy. I want to help people, but maybe not quite with that medium. And then exercise science, going into teaching. ooh, I'm still helping people, but maybe it's not still not quite on the money. And then being an entrepreneur and a coach and being able to work with people one-on-one, I can still educate, but I can form connections with my clients that feel much more like the connections that I was forming with, when I was tutoring back in the day, in terms of that one-to-one um, communication and facilitation of someone else's belief in themselves. And then, of course, the most recent is my transition from creating a lot of gut health content to shifting my focus back to what really lights me up, which is the um, flourishing health and wellness coaching. Once again, helping people. That is one of the core themes here. But helping people in a way that feels most aligned with my values and also my interests and my curiosity. And the next salto de fe, which is not career associated this time, will be moving. And I have moved out of state before, mostly just for work though, or for school. The last big move was from Georgia to Arizona, a little bit of a salto de fe. But by that time, this was during the pandemic. I needed to pick a place to live. I had visited Tucson in the past. I really loved it. And so I thought, well, I can go wherever I want to go. I don't really want to be in Georgia anymore. I can go to Arizona. And I purchased my home there back in 2020. And it's been a fantastic several years. But now I'm at a chapter in my life where once again, I feel this intuition that I can go to a different place and have new experiences and grow more than I could back in Tucson. And so ultimately, after many months of consideration and having been to Medellin twice now for going on 5 months total, I decided that what feels right to me in this moment is to release the investment that I have in my home. So, in other words, sell it and move to Medellin and spend my time here still pursuing my interests and my career path and learning Spanish and taking dance lessons and immersing myself in the culture, which I absolutely, absolutely love. I came here in November for 7 weeks, and it was a rough trip, not because of anything related to Medellin. It was just other things in life did not go to plan at all. But when I returned back to Tucson, I thought, I really have this gut feeling that if I go back to Medellin, this next trip is going to be so much better. I'm much more prepared. I know better how to move around the place. I know what to expect, and Tucson does feel safe and secure, but I don't want just safety and security. I want to be able to grow, and it is not a completely uncalculated risk because obviously, in selling my home, there's equity in there. And I think that's really important to acknowledge that all of these leaps of faith that I took, I was able to do that because my financial and social position and situation at the time afforded me the freedom. So I think it's just important to point that out and to acknowledge that privilege and to be grateful for it, because it's not every day that you can sell your home and move to another country. But and then the other side of that is I'm able to take these calculated risks, these leaps of faith. That in that I know that I'll be able to support myself. I know that I'm going to be okay no matter how things go. Ideally, they go how I would like them to, but I'm open to whatever happens. Another thing that I like to say is it's for the plot. It's for the plot. There's a quote that I can't attribute right now because I can't remember who said it, but it's something to the effect of don't try to always make the right decision. Try to make your decisions right. So, in other words, you don't know how it's going to go until you get there. And at that point, that's when you have to decide, well, what am I going to do with this now? If I sell my home and then I come here and then things go awry, I'm just going to have to say, okay, well, what am I going to do now? So those were my previous, current, and future leaps of faith. And I'm actually very, very excited about the next chapter. In the past, I had much more apprehension and fear. This change feels like a liberation. So I want to talk a little bit about, just kind of rewind for a second and talk about, like, how did I know, or how can we know when it's really time for change? Because in the first episode, I did talk about the dip, how sometimes, when we make a change or we go after something, we hit that point, that low point where it's like, ooh, this is such a grind. And actually, I read that book when I was thinking about leaving higher ed because I thought, is this just me, like just in that place where I'm not excited about it anymore and it's just going to take work? Or am I stagnating? Am I in a place now where I am not able to grow and learn more because the position doesn't require that of me and I don't have an outlet for the things that I want to pursue and learn? And that's really what I realized at that point. I thought, like, I'm not going to, like, I could easily coast, but I don't want to do that. So I would identify that as sort of a feeling of restlessness. I really felt restless. I felt um, kind of bored and a little bit frustrated at times. And this longing, because sometimes I felt like so stuck and I wanted more of a challenge. I didn't want things to be easier. I didn't want to stay where I was and have things be easier. I wanted the challenge. I wanted a change of scenery, not just to enjoy the scenery, but because I wanted to learn and grow more. And I found that I would only really feel creative when I was able to pursue my interests. And that's something that I've seen at each one of these transition points, that I get really fired up about what I'm interested in at the time. And I am not going to ignore the fact that this is likely related to ADHD as well, because of course there are hyperfixations that can last many years. Fortunately for me, training has been one that's lasted half of my life, and I don't think it's going anywhere. But yeah, I just would get to this point where, yes, I still felt afraid. I still had anxiety about leaving a familiar situation. There's that saying, the devil that you know is better than the devil that you don't know. So, in other words, like, even though your current situation might suck, maybe it feels like that's not as bad as going into a situation that's unpredictable. But I would reach this breaking point where my needs for growth and fulfillment would outweigh my fears. And I just wasn't able to stay in this specific box any longer. And I was willing to do the work and do what it took to get to this new place, because I felt that gut feeling. I felt this intuition that this other thing I need to know. I don't necessarily know that it's the right thing, but I need to pursue that. And that might look different for other people. I'm speaking really just from experience, but those were some of my signs. But, I have also heard from clients over the years that they reach those points, in their journey of trying to, attain like their smallest body and chronic dieting, that they get to a point where their fears about quitting counting macros, their fears about, practicing intuitive eating or training less, they are outweighed by their innate need for growth and fulfillment and self-actualization. And they get to a point where they're like, you know what? I don't care really what happens. Like, I'm at a point now, I cannot continue this way. This is draining my energy. It's wasting my time. It's making my life too small. And I need to make that change. So I think it's a really beautiful uh, intervention that our minds will stage for us to say, like, I'm so bored. Something has to change. Like, we need more than this. We are complex creatures, and we reach that point where it's like, this is just not enough for me anymore, and I'm willing to face the risks and face my fears. And I had so many fears. I was worried, of course, back in the day, I wasn't going to be good enough at math or science. That's not something that I had ever excelled in previously. I felt this loss of identity. I had to let go of that. There was definitely a sense of loss. There was this sense of fear, this loss of external stability, and just some beliefs, some narratives that I had internalized over the years. So, for example, hearing that the women in my family weren't good at math or science, I just chose to believe that. Like, oh, well, that's going to be me. Then I'm not good at math or science. Or identifying so much as like the choir kid, the artsy kid, that I believed that that's the only thing that I was going to be good at. And so logically, I wasn't going to be good at anything else. Of course, I can't be good at too many things. And then worrying that I like, there was no um, going back, like, oh, once I make this decision, like, this is immediate, this is forever. Or worried that people wouldn't want to hear what I had to say, or that I'm not allowed to talk about things if I don't have a formal education. Like, how dare I? Who do I think I am to try and expand my reach? And those are all really harmful, critical, unhelpful things to say. Like, you're not good enough at this. You're definitely not going to succeed at this. You're not going to get enough clients. You're not going to be able to support yourself. No one's going to want to hear from you. You're not even allowed to talk about this other stuff. Like, how dare you? How dare you share your opinion? No one's going to want to listen to that. And I think that we can get so stuck in those narratives that we choose to believe, that we've rehearsed for so many years, that we think they're our own. We don't really try to unpack, like, when did I start believing this about myself? Where did that come from? Is there, like, do I have a lot of evidence for that? Do I have evidence contrary to that? And so, what I had to do in order to take the next step, part of the breaking point is I've got to just choose to not believe this thing, or let that be true and maybe let something else be true as well. These unhelpful narratives are often read to us as children, and we believe the adults in our lives, we believe our caretakers, and we don't often have the opportunity or the time to work on unraveling those and separating them from what we know to be true about ourselves. And that was what I practiced and what I've been practicing over the years. Like, I had to start gathering my own evidence about myself based on my experiences, rather than believing what other people said about me based on their experiences. And, I obviously, like, well, I'm very capable in many areas of math and science. I don't have to be great at all of math and science. That doesn't have to be true either. But I also don't have to be terrible at all of math and science. This is just a black and white way of thinking, this absolutist thinking that is actually not helpful. It doesn't leave any room for nuance or gray areas or opportunity. And no, I didn't like waste my time during my doctorate. I am capable of critical thinking. I learned how to learn. I also greatly value formal education and higher education. That's something that I want to pursue. But also, I am allowed to share my opinion, and I am allowed to learn other things. And not everyone has to like what I have to say. Not everyone is going to be interested in what I have to say. Then that's okay. I don't need that to be true. But it's also probably not true that no one cares about what I have to say. It's probably true that there are people who want to hear what I have to say, who have not heard a message like mine before, because each one of us has a message that is unique to us and that only we can provide in the specific way that we can provide it. And so it's also probably very true that what I have to say is going to be helpful to some people. And there's a quote that I really love, again, from the author that I cited previously. She says, "There's nothing like the joy that comes up when you discover that your inhibitions and self-limiting beliefs were just a case of mistaken identity." And this is something that I've worked on with clients a lot as well, where they have internalized these narratives about themselves, these narratives about their bodies, about the way that they should behave around food, about the morality of food, the morality of their bodies, the morality of exercise and rest. And they find that these narratives have come from external sources, their family and friends, just society as a whole. And they do the work over months and years of separating those narratives from what they know to really be true about themselves. And they start to know themselves better than they ever have before, because previously they were living by someone else's script. They were living that case of mistaken identity. So no wonder they felt like things weren't really working out as they had hoped. Like, oh, I'm keep dieting and it's not really like delivering on its promises of making me a happy, more successful, more fulfilled person. Well, that's an external narrative, and that doesn't necessarily ring true for you or for most people. What actually lights you up, what actually leads you to be fulfilled, is pursuing your values. And health can certainly be a value. Even aesthetics can be a value, but family is a value. Creativity is a value. Exploration, adventure. There are values that are more expansive than just the way that we look or the way that we eat. So if some of this is sounding familiar and you're like, oh gosh, yeah, I guess I do say those things to myself. I do think those things about myself. There are some ways that you can start working on dismantling those narratives and creating a new framework for the story that you tell yourself about yourself. So one would be a practice in cognitive behavioral coaching that's called cognitive restructuring. So basically, you're just challenging, you're identifying negative, unhelpful thoughts, and then challenging them. And you're not challenging them by providing something that is like equally unbelievable and toxically positive. This is not a good vibes only podcast. This is a real podcast where we suffer and things suck sometimes. But we can at least nudge things in a more neutral direction. We can at least say, what? Okay, this thing could be true. This other thing could also be true. So maybe instead of like, oh, the women in my family are bad at math and science, I'm going to be bad at math and science. Maybe I could say something more neutral like, I wonder how I am at math and science. Just a question, could be that I'm not bad. It could be that I'm okay. It could be that I'm not great, but maybe I'm not bad, like across the board. So there's not I am awesome at math and science. Well, I don't really have the evidence for that yet until I gather it. But right now, maybe I could say, well, I actually don't know how I am. I actually don't know how this is going to turn out. Or, thinking about taking a break from counting macros or moving toward a more internally regulated way of eating. A lot of people worry, I'm not going to be able to stop eating, or I'm going to eat whatever I want and gain a bunch of weight. And side quest, that is a whole statement to unpack, but I just mentioned that because it's a common belief. And maybe we could nudge that a little bit more neutrally and say, well, I'm not sure how it's going to go when I stop counting macros, or just identifying the feeling that we're having in the moment. I'm nervous. I'm feeling worried. That's just an observation that we have in the moment. But the belief that this is not going to work is not an encouraging, helpful belief. It's not a place that you're likely to start from. But you might be more likely to start from a place of, maybe I'll at least enjoy it. Maybe I'll feel a little bit less preoccupied. Maybe nothing big will change. Maybe I'll keep eating the same way that I've been eating. And one of the ways that we can start to notice and change those beliefs is just being aware of the types of cognitive distortions that we can have. So one of the most common is that all or nothing thinking. So we see things in just black and white terms. There's no shades of gray. There's no complexity to the situation. It is, if you felt really tired today and you decided to not go to the gym, an all or nothing thought might be, I'm so lazy. So you've just now evaluated yourself as a human being, as a person. You are lazy because you needed to take a break from the gym today. Or if I stop counting macros, then I know I'm just going to eat whatever I want, and I'm never going to be able to learn how to control myself. So this like all or nothing thinking, like either I count macros forever, or I fall off the rails. Or overgeneralization, which is very similar. It's like something happens one time or a few times, and then we generalize that to, oh, well, this is always going to happen. And this is what often keeps people kind of stuck in this cycle of chronic dieting and restricting, is that they will have a hard time regulating the intake of one type of food. And then they'll say, like, oh, I can't be around sweets. Anytime I'm around sweets, I just lose control. Or either mental filtering, sort of like a cognitive bias, which we are prone to anyway because we're humans and that's our brains trying to keep us safe, or discounting positive things, like minimizing our successes or our positive experiences, especially when it's something that we've achieved. We're like, oh, well, it wasn't that hard anyway. Like, We're not allowed to give ourselves a pat on the back and like feel proud of the things we've done because, well, it just didn't feel like it was hard enough. And so like, I don't deserve any sort of recognition for that. Or the, um, focusing just on the negative side of things of like, oh, this past week, I, yeah, I guess I did make some progress in my thoughts, but I still skipped the gym and I still did this other thing that I'm disappointed about. We focus so much on the things that we didn't do. We focus so much on the deficits. We might also jump to conclusions. We might make assumptions about what other people are going to think about us. Like, oof, if I go to the beach and I'm wearing this bathing suit, I feel so uncomfortable in my body, in large part because I think that other people are going to be judging me. They're going to be looking at me and thinking bad things. And then we might catastrophize from there. Like, what if someone says something and then I feel so embarrassed? And we can go down this, we can create this whole story about how something could go wrong and worry about it before it's even happened. And we worry so much that we don't take the chance to experience something new and maybe enjoy it. And quite often we also personalize things, and we do that in a way, in such a way that we try to kind of take control, like we take responsibility for the things that are happening around us that are completely outside of our control. And for example, like maybe something, there was some emergency or there was a traffic jam and you miss your meeting or you miss your exercise class, and and that's unfortunate. That's a bummer of a situation, and we can accept like, man, that's frustrating. But we don't have to say like, oh my gosh, that it's my fault. There's definitely a balance here of being able to take ownership and identifying the things that are within our control, which is actually a very small list of things that we actually have like real influence over, versus the things outside of our control. We can choose how we respond to the things outside of our control. But if we try to internalize absolutely everything, and sometimes we see this with taking like radical responsibility, like instead of saying, I have a lot of agency in my life, it becomes, I am to blame for everything and everything is wrong because of me. And sometimes we do this to other people as well. Like we say, oh, it doesn't matter what your life circumstances are, like no excuses, everyone has the same 24 hours in a day. No, they don't. That's like saying, in the fitness industry, that's like saying a calorie is a calorie. We know what that means, but actually we know that the food containing those calories will have a different impact on your health. Just like the things that you have to do with those hours in a day will have a different impact on your health and what you're capable of. And quite often when we do this, we come up with these should statements and we label ourselves. One thing that I really, a quote that I love from Bill Miller, who is like the father of motivational interviewing, he says, no one likes to be should on. So like you don't like it when someone else comes to you and says, hey, you should do X, Y, and Z. Even if their idea is great, even if it's something that you might have done on your own, it doesn't feel good to have someone should on you. And it doesn't feel good to should on yourself either. One thing that I recommend to clients is that instead of using should, we say could. So instead of saying I should go to the gym right now, and like even just saying that is like, oh, we feel that kind of like guilt for not doing it, is to say I could go to the gym right now. Yeah, it's true. I could do this other thing too. I have options. I have choices. I could go to the gym right now, and maybe I'll choose to do that, and maybe not. And if it's something that I really want to do and I'm having a hard time doing it, it doesn't help to continue to should on myself and continue to label myself as a lazy person and to criticize myself. What's much more helpful is to accept the reality of the situation. I'm not doing the thing that I want to be doing, with minimal critical judgment and kindness and compassion. Like, I don't feel great when I don't follow through on the things that I want to do. Seems like I'm not really putting myself first right now. And my body and my mind don't feel good. And also, I'm having a really hard time getting up and going to the gym. Why is that? What's up with that? Like, what's creating the friction here? How can I reduce that friction? How can I go forward and do the thing that I really want to do? So those are some examples of the cognitive distortions, and what can really come up quite often when we're talking about making a big change, would be like that all or nothing thinking of this either has to go great or it's going to go awful. There's no in between. or the catastrophizing and jumping to conclusions. Like, if there's no in between and this thing goes poorly, it's going to go absolutely the worst it could possibly go. And then the personalization, trying to control every possible factor, which is absolutely impossible. And shoulding ourselves in either direction, like I should stay and do this thing that I've committed to, or I should do this other thing because I'm not happy here. And all of those create so much stress and anxiety. They make the stakes so high. Then they create this attachment to a specific outcome. Like, this really has to go in exactly the way that I want it to go, because if it doesn't, then it's a failure. I'm a failure. There we have that labeling and overgeneralization, and then everything's for nothing. And that is not the case. So if we can keep those cognitive distortions in mind, if we can continue with our practice of acceptance, which is not resignation. Like I mentioned before, it is just not arguing with reality, just acknowledging the reality of the situation and making peace with the uncomfortable thoughts and emotions, knowing this moment is not going to last forever. Everything is impermanent. This is a moment of suffering. And I can reduce my suffering by saying, okay, this is the reality of the situation right now. And I can't change it in this very moment, but I can decide what I want the next step to be. And then practicing, as I mentioned in the first episode as well, that self-compassion and that kindness. Making big changes, it's scary. There is absolutely fear there. It's not that we're doing this like, just, oh, this is super easy. If it was easy and there was no fear, then there wouldn't be anything to talk about. It'd be like, oh yeah, like I brushed my teeth the other day, and yeah, that could be challenging for some people, but like it's not the level of challenge that is, trying to break a decade of chronic dieting, or changing your career path, or moving to another country. So it's really worthwhile to build that practice of kindness and self-compassion, so that when things get really hard, yeah, we have the skills of cognitive restructuring, but it's really hard to do that when we're in a super stressed out state and we kind of feel like, we have tunnel vision. It's so helpful to be able to pause, notice, oof, I am feeling so overwhelmed right now. It makes sense with what I'm trying to do. Let me just practice providing myself some self-compassion, some kindness, some understanding, remembering that this is an experience of like common in humanity. Like, people have hard times, people suffer. And then once I feel a little bit more calm, I can check in and say, like, what kind of distortion am I coming up with right now? The story that I'm telling myself is X, Y, and Z, is that this is not going to work out, that no one wants to hear what I have to say, that I'm not good enough, that I'm not going to succeed at this. Well, sure, those can be possible. But is it really helpful to choose to believe all of those and not give myself any alternatives? It's literally your brain. It's literally you imagining things. You can build your skills of imagining other possibilities and of allowing for things to unfold, and building your resilience, your ability to respond to the reality of the current situation, especially when it's not what you anticipated. And so over time, you can start to say, this ain't my first rodeo. I've done stuff like this before. I am so capable of doing challenging things. I'm so capable of adapting to big changes in my life. I'm so capable of stepping outside of this box and getting to know myself and writing and living by my own script. I am so capable of doing those things. And I don't have to know that everything is going to turn out right. I just have to trust myself. And actually, it's kind of fun. Sometimes it's kind of fun to take these risks, these leaps of faith, and watch ourselves as we grapple with what happens. And then we can start to gather evidence to the contrary of all of those limiting beliefs and say, like, wow, you know what? I feel so liberated. Like, that was a case of mistaken identity. So thank you again for joining me today. I hope that you found this helpful and that you are taking away from this, something that you can use in your own journey, wherever you are right now. If you're feeling that restlessness, that like, don't feel like I'm in quite the right spot. Am I living by somebody else's script right now? Or if you're in the midst of it and you're like, oh my gosh, the wheels are falling off and I'm so stressed out. How am I going to cope with this? I don't want to go back to where I was, but how can I do the next right thing? Or if you are, this ain't your first rodeo either, and this stuff just sounds familiar to you, I hope that it resonates. So thank you again, and I'll see you all next time. And until then, just keep trusting yourself.
Thank you for tuning into another episode of the Salt of the Fae podcast. You can follow me on YouTube at saltothefae_, or on Instagram at saltothefaepod.